What is poppin' YouTube? Bringing you my tier list of running backs for Dynasty Fantasy Football, and we are including rookies in this tier list. So if you like Dynasty Fantasy Football, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. Want to get you guys in some live subscriber mock drafts, whether it's startup, whether it's rookie, here over the next few days. So I want you here in the community we're building. First, we're starting off here in our first tier, and as you can imagine, it is the 2 first plus tier, and we got Bijan Robinson, Jahmyr Gibbs, and Breece Hall. I'll be clear, making these rankings, it was really hard. The Dynasty landscape has absolutely changed, where of course we're all prioritizing the wide receivers, the quarterbacks and super flex, and even tight ends and tight end premium to get one of those elite level guys. Running backs seem to just be thrown out the window because we've seen the wins over replacement, because we've seen year after year after year the change in the running back landscape. It's just a very volatile position. But these guys, I feel very confident in over the next 2 to 3 years with Bijan Robinson, Jahmyr Gibbs, and Breece Hall. If we look at what happened this year, I mean, Breece Hall had an absolutely fabulous fantasy football season where honestly finished as the RB2 in full PPR with 17.1 fantasy points per game. And Breece Hall coming off an ACL, we were a little bit concerned, started off a little bit slow, but ended up really picking it up towards the end of the season. Imagine if he had a full season of Aaron Rodgers. Absolutely crazy. We also saw Jahmyr Gibbs, who finished as the RB10 with 16.1 fantasy points per game. Also started off slow. We saw David Montgomery really take off at the beginning of the season. Then Jahmyr Gibbs and that elite level athleticism really helped him towards the end of the season. And then, of course, Bijan Robinson. We know the issues that happened with Bijan Robinson this fantasy football season. A lot of that had to do with Arthur Smith. And so if we're just projecting that with a new regime, with them understanding how to use Bijan Robinson as the ultimate playmaker, running back that he is, the way that we're talking about Marvin Harrison Jr. for this rookie class is exactly how we were talking about Bijan Robinson last year. So I like some Bijan Robinson here. Have him still up here in this first tier, in that 2 plus first tier. And then we move to our 1 first, like a middle of the first round pick for 2024. And we started off with Christian McCaffrey. And I understand age for a running back, it always fluctuates, it always changes. And we really like to get off these guys by their age 26 season. The data shows that, but how can you get off of Christian McCaffrey? If we look at ourselves in the Dynasty community and say, I am trying to win a fantasy football championship, Christian McCaffrey would be the guy. So I understand you're going to have to pay up. I understand it's a lot more to pay up than a typical 27, 28-year-old running back. But when my man just got done doing, he put up a 24.5 fantasy points per game season, finished as the RB over 1 and points overall in points per game. You have to understand that this guy was an absolute game wrecker. And if you had him on your team, you were happy about it. But I don't know how we can project him going forward and say, yeah, he's not going to be able to do it. He's still with the San Francisco 49ers team. They absolutely love to run the ball. Cool. Maybe he starts to run the ball a little less through the tackles and they start to swing it out to him. I mean, my dude's like a hybrid between a receiver and a running back. So I absolutely love Christian McCaffrey. Still got to include him here. I understand age is always a question with these running backs, but you got to have Christian McCaffrey here leading off this year. My next guy in the tier is going to be Jonathan Taylor. And I talked about Jonathan Taylor in my video from 2 days ago, where we talked about how Jonathan Taylor, yes, with Anthony Richardson coming back, Jonathan Taylor is getting a little bit older. He's going to be 25. I understand the concerns that may be that he may never return to that RB1 overall points per game upside that he once had. I just still think in this running back landscape, he's got the contract and he's got a really great situation with a good quarterback and with a good offensive line. We've seen the Colts be able to build teams around this offense. So I like Jonathan Taylor in that first mid tier. If you missed out maybe on those top guys, being able to get him, I know he's a little bit older than some of the other guys in the tier, but I still like Jonathan Taylor. Then move on to our next guy, Devon Achane. Devon, let's be clear. Last year when we were talking about our rookies, I said he compared very similarly to Chris Johnson, but I said every small, fast, athletic back we've been hoping would be the next Chris Johnson. And Devon is looking like he potentially is the next Chris Johnson. With the way that he has his blazing speed, the Miami Dolphins love to just throw it out to him with a screen, and he was able to house it. So Devon, I know he kind of had his injury woes towards the end of the season from week 10 on, but I still think you have to have Devon here as a mid first. We saw that game-wrecking speed, and so maybe if Raheem Mostert, some of those touchdowns end up going to Devon can be healthier so he can get more of that workload. I think we could be looking at Devon as an ultimate value here in the mid first, because if he was on the trajectory that he was on, we might be talking about him in that 2 first plus category, but those injuries definitely subsided him. Next guy in the tier is going to be Kyren Williams. And Kyren Williams with the Rams, I was a little bit hesitant to put him here because I have not been a Kyren truther. Probably drafted him with a 3rd round pick in your rookie leagues a few years ago. He definitely showed out as a top 7-6 RB this year, finishing as the RB2 on a points per game basis. I definitely love some Kyren Williams. I mean, he did get injured this season, but we saw when you needed him the most, he was able to hang in there. So I like him in this tier. We move on to our next guy in the tier, and it's going to be Travis Etienne. And Travis Etienne, I think his situation, like we thought this Jacksonville Jaguars offense was going to take the next step. That didn't necessarily happen, but Travis Etienne was more of a workhorse than we thought. Last year when we saw Tank Bigsby get drafted to the Jacksonville Jaguars, we were a little bit worried about the workload, but Travis Etienne still showed that he's a bell cow. And then I added in Kenneth Walker. I know Kenneth Walker, there's definitely a lot of debate around him in the Dynasty Fantasy Football space just because of Zach Charbonnet and what's his offense going to look like going forward. Kenneth Walker really hasn't been able to be an ultimate level bell cow. The splits this last year were about 58 to 42 between him and Zach Charbonnet, but I still think he's worth a mid first. I still think he has the upside to really be electric. I think Jonathan Taylor, that is kind of the Kenneth Walker build. So I think Kenneth Walker, he's maybe a little bit cheaper than Jonathan Taylor. I know I have him in the same tier here, but I think you could probably trade a little bit less and get Kenneth Walker, and I like that. Moving on to our late first, early second, I got Rachaad White, Saquon Barkley, James Cook, Isaiah Pacheco, Josh Jacobs. Rachaad White, we were wrong on Rachaad White last offseason. I thought it was a great time to trade when it was like, okay, he's going to be the bell cow, but can he be the bell cow? And yes, he could be the bell cow. Alvin Kamara light put up 15.8 fantasy points per game. Like really great. I mean, he finished as the RB4 overall on the season if we're looking at just overall points, but he was absolutely electric. Now, there's some things that I'm worried about with his situation going into 2024, which is maybe why I don't have him in the same tier up above, because I was debating maybe putting him in the mid first, but I ended up putting him here in the late first, early second range. And so with Rachaad White, the big thing is what's going to happen with Baker Mayfield. They lost their offensive coordinator to the Panthers. Is Mike Evans going to resign? I just get a little bit worried. And I know we were talking about these same things after Tom Brady retired, but I still think the Tampa Bay Bucks offensive organization is kind of just going through a little bit of what happens when you lose an absolute legend at quarterback. And so I assume they probably re-sign Baker Mayfield, which is going to be great for Rachaad White. Even if Mike Evans leaves, I guess that's really great for Rachaad White because they're just going to be targeting him out of the backfield. They're going to be running him a ton. You also never know what's going to happen through the draft. So Rachaad White, like I said, third round draft pick, going to be coming up on his payday here in the next 2 years. So Rachaad White, I think he's a valuable pick here. I think you could make the argument that maybe he should be in the tier above, but I feel very confident with him right here. Next guy is going to be Saquon Barkley. And Saquon Barkley is entering free agency. He is also going to be past that age 26 age cliff. So there are some things playing against Saquon Barkley in his favor, but let's say Saquon Barkley lands on the Buffalo Bills. Let's say Saquon Barkley lands with the Kansas City Chiefs. Let's say, for an instance, Saquon Barkley lands with maybe the Houston Texans in the backfield with CJ Stroud. I think there is a plenty of spots that Saquon Barkley can go that can really increase his overall value here in Dynasty. So a lot of people might prefer James Cook, the age, or Isaiah Pacheco, but I like Saquon Barkley because I know his situation is in flux, and when a situation is in flux with a good player, you typically buy into that because he's either going to be in the same situation that he was, so you got a little bit of a discount there, or his situation is going to increase such exponentially that you're going to feel really great about it. My next guy is going to be James Cook. James Cook, same thing. I don't know what's happening. Maybe the Buffalo Bills bring in another running back to compete with James Cook, but James Cook proved himself this year that he is a capable running back in the NFL, where he finished as the RB12 overall. He only had 13.7 points per game in PPR, so it wasn't absolutely great, but he did have some really big games this year. So go get some James Cook here if you want him in the second. Like I said, I still prefer to trade for Rachaad White, Saquon Barkley, because I think they're all relatively around the same price, but understand if you want to go get James Cook. And then I included Isaiah Pacheco, Josh Jacobs. Josh Jacobs, just terrible situation. We'll have to see where he ends up next year team-wise, if he's going to be back with the Raiders, if he's going to be somewhere else. And then Isaiah Pacheco, I mean, when you're playing with the GOAT, Patrick Mahomes, I just felt like they needed more receiving help out of the backfield, and Isaiah Pacheco didn't always get that. Had some issues with fumbling in the Super Bowl, but hopefully he's back. He's proven a lot this last year in fantasy football. Now, moving on to kind of our next section, we're talking about the mid-late second. So we got Jonathan Brooks, we got Braylon Allen, we got Javonte Williams, Ramondre Stevenson, David Montgomery, Tajay Spears, DeAndre Swift, Bucky Irving, and Blake Corum. Now, I did include some of the rookies here and where I have them. I mean, I have Jonathan Brooks currently as my RB1. I got Braylon Allen as my RB2. I like both these guys. I've seen projections that Jonathan Brooks might be going in the second round. If he gets second round draft capital, I wouldn't be surprised if he maybe even gets bumped up to a late first, early second. I mean, that's just what happens with these running backs. You know, first round's amazing. We've been seeing it more and more these last few years, but we've always had as the second round is the standard for these running backs to get drafted. Braylon Allen, we thought he was going to be the RB1 of this class when we were looking back at it a few years ago, but he's more projected a third round pick. I've seen him being mocked everywhere to like the Baltimore Ravens, and seeing a guy like Braylon Allen in the backfield with Lamar Jackson, I think that would just boost his draft stock, even if he does get that third round draft capital, which is not ideal, but still good enough for a running back to really provide some really great Dynasty Fantasy Football value for it. Then we got Javonte, Ramondre Stevenson. Both their situations are a little bit in flux. Who's going to be the quarterback for the Broncos? Who's going to be the quarterback for the Patriots? But we've seen what they've been able to do. Javonte Williams, honestly, coming off his ACL, having the year that he did have is exciting, but this will be year 2 removed off that ACL, so we do like that for Javonte. David Montgomery, he's got the contract, but he does have Jahmyr Gibbs, and I just expect Jahmyr Gibbs to take that next step next next year where maybe David Montgomery falls back. But I still think David Montgomery, he's going to be that goal line back. And when you're playing in an offense like the Detroit Lions, that's just going to be super great for you. Then we got Tajay Spears. And Tajay Spears honestly could be one to move up this tier. With Derrick Henry being a free agent, Tajay Spears, if the Titans don't draft anyone, Tajay Spears could be pushed up to being a little bit ahead in this tier, and I would like that for him. Then we got DeAndre Swift, and we'll have to see where DeAndre Swift lands, because I know this was just a one-year deal with him, but he did prove to be really great with the Philadelphia Eagles. I would love to see him back with the Eagles, but he might end up somewhere else. We'd always have loved the potential. He's flashed that a ton this year, but it never really fully transpired into like the amazing fantasy football finish that we were hoping for, but he was still a very high-end RB2, low-end RB1 for fantasy football purposes. Then I end off with two rookies here, with Bucky Irving, with Blake Corum. Both these guys, like Bucky Irving's more of your scat back, which in past years we'd probably be a little less excited about, but with the NFL continuing to evolve and change, these running backs that can catch passes out of the backfield, absolutely electric. And then Blake Corum, I know I hate to talk about a Michigan Wolverine, but he was a very solid running back, has a nose for the end zone, did that to my Buckeyes all the time. So I do like Blake Corum. Both of these guys are kind of projected to be third-round picks, so I have them in the mid to late second round of value for Dynasty. Then we go to late second win now. So I wanted to break this down by the late second, so we're going to go win now and youth. So in the late second win now, we got Alvin Kamara, Joe Mixon, Derrick Henry, Austin Eckler, Nick Chubb, Aaron Jones, James Conner. I don't think there's ever been a better time in Dynasty to really be trying to compete and get cheap running back production. I feel like we said, a few years ago, you were having to really overpay to get the running backs, because at the time, if you were zagging and everyone was overpaying for running backs in PPR and you were getting all the wide receivers, your team's probably looking great right now. But there's a bunch of Dynasty teams out there that back in 2018, 2019 were loading up on all their running backs, and then all of a sudden now are looking at their teams and they are regretting decisions of life. That would be me in a few leagues, because I'm absolutely loaded with some of these late second win now guys. But they help you win. That is the truth. At the end of the day, you want to win fantasy football. And Alvin Kamara, Joe Mixon, Derrick Henry, Austin Eckler, not so much this year. Nick Chubb, hopefully returning from that ACL, huge meniscus tear. Aaron Jones, James Conner, these guys all put up points. So I have them listed like this right here. You could maybe argue some differences. I still think everyone would probably agree Alvin Kamara is the top here. Joe Mixon also with the offense with Joe Burrow should also be up there. Derrick Henry is kind of in flux. If he lands in a terrible situation, could go down. But I don't think Derrick Henry, who's kind of getting to maybe 1-2 years away from retiring, would go to a bad situation. I think he's going to go to a Super Bowl contender. So I like that late second window. And then we're going to do another, like I said, this late second with youth. So got Trey Benson, Jalen Warren, Najee Harris, Brian Robinson, Roschon Johnson, and Zach Charbonnet. Trey Benson, we'll have to see where he lands. I know he's projected somewhere between a third and fourth round pick. You take these shots in your rookie drafts on these running backs, but instead of maybe even, like I said, if you don't necessarily love Trey Benson in your rookie drafts, being able to flip that for like a Jalen Warren, Najee Harris, a Brian Robinson, Brian Robinson with Antonio Gibson hitting free agency, we'll have to see if Chris Rodriguez steps up, whether they bring in someone else in the draft. And then you got Roschon Johnson, fourth round pick to the Chicago Bears, ran really hard. The metrics weren't necessarily great for him this year, but the opportunity was. And then we got Zach Charbonnet, who does he take another step this season with Ken Walker? We'll have to see. I'm a big Zach Charbonnet proponent, but the situation doesn't look absolutely great for year two. So that's kind of how I'm looking at these guys, these running backs with the rookies for 2024 Dynasty Fantasy Football. Let me know, what difference would you do? Is there anything that I missed? Is there anybody that I ranked too low? Is there anyone that I ranked too high? Let me know down below. Would love to have that discussion with you. If you're new here, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. Want you to be in the subscriber mock drafts that we're going to be doing over the next few days, and I'll catch you guys all in the next one.